Okay, welcome again to my unrequested discussion tonight. These are primarily for the Temple Shalom discussion group that meets about 4 to 5 times a year um, online since COVID's been around. We hope we can get back to in-home someday in the near future. The topic today deals with God. It's not something that we haven't discussed before, but specifically, we're going to discuss the attempts to reconcile God with philosophy, at least as applied to Judaism. Similar attempts have been made with other major religions. Let me close the door here just to keep down sound from getting out or in. Okay, that takes care of that. All right, we'll start with the first well-known attempt to reconcile Judaism with philosophy. Goes way back to the first century. And I can't remember whether that was BCE, probably was. And this was Philo of Alexandria. And I did read that some time ago, and it was not too convincing to me, but it was an honorable first attempt to make that reconciliation, and it should be recognized. A more vigorous and successful and famous attempt was made by Maimonides around approximately 1190. And he made an attempt to show that the Hebrew Bible and philosophy were not contradictory. A later attempt, I can't say it was to reconcile Judaism and philosophy, but to discuss the two, was made by Spinoza in 1670. And what he stated, his basic conclusion was that the Bible, primarily the Hebrew Bible, was not compatible with philosophy. In fact, he went so far as to say incompatible with philosophy. He almost undoubtedly felt the same about the Christian Bible as well. But he had been excommunicated by the Jewish community, and most of his friends were members of the Dutch Reformed Church at that time, so he sort of went out of his way not to publicly offend them, at least. The big difference between the two was that Maimonides does allow for biblical texts to be interpreted metaphorically, with the exception of Moses. Maimonides is very interesting. If you read at least some interpretations of his original writings, he gives little hints that he's not saying everything he believes, and only his brighter students will be able to figure out what he means. And I got the impression, as I read through some of the more direct works of Maimonides, was that he exempted Moses from being interpreted metaphorically, primarily because he knew that he would be totally discredited if he included him. So he sort of uses the excuse that God spoke directly to Moses with a sort of quote face-to-face encounter, or at least a back-to-face encounter, I guess, as the case would be. Maimonides, one of his more favorite texts is titled Mishnah Torah, which roughly translates to an explanation of the Bible and Jewish law. And he did this to try to make the law more accessible to the average person. And he worked very hard in this to make sure that God was not regarded as a corporal being, which he very much is in the Bible. He goes to great lengths to say any likeness to a life form or a human form is a metaphor only. So one of the early disputes between philosophy and religion starts right off with the creation story. Philosophers felt that the world was eternal without beginning and end, whereas the religionists believed that it was created in time. Now here it's very interesting that science has proved the religionists right. We know that our universe is only 14 billion years, which is a very small fraction of eternity, and the Earth even less, about 6 billion years old. So it turns out that Maimonides was correct, accepting the fact that the world was created and did not exist forever. Took a heck of a lot of science to prove that point many years later. So in any case, there was creation. Now, whether you attribute it to God or nature is a matter of preference. Both Maimonides and Spinoza believed in God in quotes, but Spinoza does not separate God from nature. He doesn't quite believe that nature and God are identical, but God includes nature would be the best way to put that. Philosophers held that matter could not be created from nothing, and they are mostly correct in that regard. However, I don't think they would have been prepared for the shock that matter can be created from energy. So matter can come from non-matter. And energy / matter could be eternal. But this I think has to be resolved somewhat. Space and time are intertwined physically, and it's kind of beyond the comprehension of most mortals, other than those who deal with cosmologic physics. But let's go ahead and say that in this case, the religionists had it correct. There was a creation. It has not been around all the time. Maimonides held that prophecy was a rational event and that all miracles have a rational explanation. If you combine that with metaphor, you get quite a bit of leeway in terms of biblical interpretation. Maimonides felt that an active intellect and true reality combine for prophecy, whereas philosophy uses reason alone. I think that's probably reasonable, if we can use the same word to describe it. I don't think philosophers are, I'm not sure if they're allowed to use things such as intuition or felt revelation, etc. There are problems with reason alone. You can use reason to justify fascism, communism, infanticide, etc., etc., etc. So there is some faculty that we have to add to reason for a better world. And I don't know what you want to call it. I don't mind calling it God personally, but it gets some people bent out of shape. But there's clearly some things that we know by intuition, and it's hard to justify them completely by reason. Going back to whether the Earth was always here or created, one of the examples used by Maimonides for the justification of having a Sabbath was that it appreciates and emphasizes the fact that the world was created in time. And whether it was 6,000 or 6 billion years ago, it doesn't make any difference. There was clearly a creation that occurred over a period of time. And Maimonides allows for some pagan practices being modified and incorporated into texts and laws. And he just says that people were used to them, and this was a good way to have them to continue to practice religion. And just examples of these are for Christmas trees, or pagan idea, so almost like tree ritual. The ritual egg is found in many religions, candle lighting, etc. So many of the customs may have had origin in pagan rituals, and they still bring meaning. I mean, it's hard to ignore a Christmas tree or a Hanukkah menorah or a cross or a Star of David or a crescent moon, depending upon your religion. These are powerful images regardless of whether they had a pagan origin or not. Maimonides worked to reconcile the law and scripture with Aristotelian philosophy, primarily by allowing interpretation by metaphor. Spinoza did not allow metaphor. He said the Bible says exactly what it says, and that's what it means, and therefore he pretty much dispenses with Bible, but he does not dispense with God, as he's accused of being an atheist. He was not an atheist. Spinoza was excommunicated from the Jewish community in 1656. Excommunication in Jewish society at that time merely meant that I guess it was sort of like being shunned by the Amish. People don't talk to you, they don't recognize you're around. You're basically no longer a member of the community. And once he declared that the Bible was no longer sacred at all, it did not help his cause. There is some interesting history that relates to what happened to Spinoza, though. If you know your history, you'll know that the Jews were expelled from Spain and Portugal not too long before Spinoza's time, and many of them went to Holland, and the practice of Judaism became quite loose because of all of these movements, not dissimilar from what's happened in the United States, where Reform Judaism is quite a few steps away from Orthodox Judaism, but at a time when all Judaism was, quote, Orthodox, the Orthodox community was quite upset over Jews wandering too far from the fold there. And they sent a lot of Orthodox rabbis from all around the Jewish world to Holland at the time, so that the community of teachers and rabbis were primarily very orthodox, and were not about to put up with a Spinoza. Spinoza today would be welcomed. He'd be welcomed in any synagogue, actually, if he followed the rituals. Even if he didn't believe in them, he would be accepted in orthodoxy. And if he didn't preach too much, he might be accepted. He would certainly be accepted in any Reform synagogue, and probably most conservative ones as well. So Spinoza rejected the idea that true good or true life could be achieved by following God's commandments, that which is written in the Bible, but required an intellectual love of God. That has a little bit of mysticism in it, actually. I'm comfortable with that myself. I think a lot of people criticize those who quote the Bible but do not live it by its spirit. And from that standpoint, we would agree. Spinoza sort of believed in a infinite God, and that nothing existed outside of God, so that the entire creation, including human being, is sort of a part of it. I'm comfortable with that idea personally. I guess other people may not be. I see the creation as being one thing, and at least so far, all the rules in our universe seem to be universal. It's not like one planet has one set of rules and another planet has another set of rules, in terms of physics, at least, anyhow. Spinoza further stated that God does not have free will. And I think that's pretty much true. I guess the closest we could get to God having free will is if you look at quantum theory, where certain outcomes are unpredictable in terms of a specific outcome, but the frequency of certain outcomes is determined in advance. So it's sort of, I guess it's like if you roll a dice. Does the die have free will? Well, you don't know what it's going to come up, but it's not exactly like the dice makes a conscious decision. And I guess that's how, at least that's how we perceive quantum mechanics working out. We don't give electrons free will, but exactly where they're located and what they're doing, we have trouble predicting, other than in a statistical manner. So going back to Spinoza, he feels that the laws of nature are part of God. I'm personally very comfortable with that. He says reason is the handmaiden of philosophy. However, there is no such thing as reasonable religious philosophy. This is Spinoza. But philosophy can develop ethics. Keep in mind that Spinoza was antagonistic toward religion at the time, which was very orthodox, hardcore, not very flexible. I'm not sure that statement applies anymore. I think that reason and religion have considerable overlap. At times, they have no overlap. I will have to confess that. But I think that some part of religious philosophy is reasonable. Religion, generic religion, classifies good and bad events according to superstition. But it allows for a religion that does not include superstition. So it's sort of a paradox to my mind. That so many things in the Bible are explained on the basis of really superstition, but then religion discourages superstition. So it's kind of a contradiction in and of itself that philosophy wouldn't tolerate so well. Spinoza did state that philosophic inquiry does not oppose, quote, true religion or state. Obviously, the Orthodox community didn't agree with that in Holland. The government kind of ignored him since he was spent most of his energy attacking Judaism or generic religion, and he didn't get too specific with Christianity, and I suspect there were some politics at play here. He did allow prophecy as insight, and I'm comfortable with that personally. That prophecy is really, especially when it's correct, is good insight, or at least accurate insight. But he does caution against imagination leading to inadequate ideas, and I think that is also correct. Imagination can lead to insight, but imagination can also lead to all sorts of other things. So we go to God, according to Spinoza, acts through nature, not divine will. I pretty much agree with that, but I don't mind calling divine will nature, particularly when if I approve of what's going on. Spinoza did allow for law for political and social stability. He felt that true religion is universal, and I would agree with that. However, you can celebrate the universal in particular ways, just like you can celebrate a birthday or an anniversary or a new year, many different ways, but they're all celebrating something that is universal. So, I guess my own view is that you can find the universal even in the specific sometimes. Spinoza feels that divine law ultimately achieves good and can be understood through reason. I think Maimonides, his predecessor, believes a little bit more, and I would also, that as we mentioned earlier in this talk, that reason alone sometimes comes up short, and there are certain things that have to be believed on the basis of faith, insight, feeling, perhaps maybe a better word. It gets sort of, even taking the Ten Commandments, thou shalt love thy mother and father. I think that's it in there. We'll take that as a commandment. There are many animal societies that get along quite well without that. And actually, if you look at early human history, fratricide, killing a child that was a rival for your kingdom that you didn't want was acceptable at one time. Um, so I think reason alone sometimes is inadequate, and we have to supplement it with what we call divine law in order to achieve good. Spinoza reduced the commandments to one: love thy neighbor, and I think you can derive a lot of things from that. Um, I think much of religious law is reasonable. Some of it is ridiculous, and it's up to us to find the balance. And even the ridiculous can have meaning, though, and meaning for some people. And so I think if your tradition or whatever seems silly to me, if you're not harming anybody, I have no problem with it. And if it's reinforcing your faith and proper behavior, I think it's probably a good idea. All right, we're coming up on the 26-minute mark, which is a little bit over my usual goal of about 20 minutes. And we're left with a question of, is there a God or is there not a God? Does it matter? Can we accept a God like Maimonides, one that allows us to add reason and interpret the Bible metaphorically? Or you want to jump all the way to Spinoza and say that the Bible is, basically a collection of stories and should not be interpreted metaphorically or given much authority, that there's still a universal God. I personally, I kind of combine the two a bit, probably more like Spinoza, but I'm much more tolerant of religious works, and believe that if you interpret them metaphorically and you're allowed to use your reason to adjust them, I think they're useful. All right, bid everybody a good night. We'll have a good discussion and give everybody a chance to weigh in on the topics as planned.